Hello, everybody. I'm John Till Johnson, CEO of Nemertes, here with my co-host.
John Burke, CTO of Nemertes.
And you are listening to Heavy Strategy, the show that tries to ask the right questions, not give the right answers. And John, I think we have a great follow-up that came in. You want to
We do
read
indeed.
it to us?
A listener submitted this follow-up about Heavy Strategy. Hey all, so thankful for everything, packet pushers. And let me just say, yeah, shout out to packet pushers. Going to make a pitch for a show topic. It's not a secret that outsourcing of IT functions has increased over time for US-based companies. Many of the IT layoffs in recent years directly coincide with this trend. I know the answer varies by company, but it seems there has to be an optimized sweet spot for in-house and outsourced ratios. I'm a network engineer for a very large company. My opinion is that most large enterprises have totally over-outsourced IT functions, and that structure actively hurts the business. There are a ton of angles, but the opportunity cost associated with managing vendors and the brain drain effect on companies are the worst aspects that I've observed. I'd love your perspectives on this topic, and we would be happy to do a show on this topic, and we will.
So there you go, guys. If you don't think we listen to your follow-ups, we surely do, because that is a great topic. It's a perennial topic. And I will also point out that cloud is a form of outsourcing. Yes, it is. And so a lot of the benefits that people claim to be getting from outsourcing, they're claiming to get from cloud, and sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't, as this follow-up indicated.
And they almost always wind up paying more.
Yes.
A preview of what we'll talk about.
Exactly. But now for today's show, we are halfway through the year here, but now is an excellent time to do a somewhat belated New Year's resolution. It was preempted by events, so we didn't do this back in January, but we decided to circle back to it because it's an important topic, which is following your strategy. Your resolution should be to follow your technology strategy once you've built one. And probably the great place to start is, why should this be your resolution, John?
Well, I think a lot of it circles back to that point that you have in there. If you set a technology strategy, and I'm going to extend that a little bit and say, if you've set a technology strategy properly, and I'll hark back to Heavy Strategy 097, which is build a strategy, not a projects plan. Because a lot of folks' strategy, of course, isn't really a strategy. It's just a list of the projects they intend to undertake through the course of the year, some of which are continuing, some of which are new. But an IT strategy, properly developed, flows first out of the business's strategy, and after that, out of a set of technology principles that support the business strategy. So if you followed the bouncing ball and developed your IT strategy based on technology principles that support the business strategy, then you should have a good plan in place for things that you need to do in the coming year or the current year, if we're mid-year now, to support the business's operations, to support the business's plans for the year. And if not that, then things that you're doing simply out of technological necessity, rolling out stuff that you've lost support for, patching things that need to be patched, that sort of operational stuff that's day to day. And I know it's always tempting to shift away from thinking about strategy to just looking at the list of projects and managing on a project by project basis. It's also tempting to focus on the stuff that pops up and the emergencies that you've got to deal with. But if the strategy was properly made in the first place, you should still be using that as the basis of your actions.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I always keep defaulting to the simple, like in human life, the mundane examples of strategy. You may have a strategy that says, I want to lose weight. You may have a strategy that says, I want to build muscle. Whatever it is for your sort of personal maintenance, you should be stopping and checking every day, every week. Am I doing things in accordance with my stated goal, my strategic direction? Maybe you just want the numbers on the scale to come down and you don't really care how you do it. Maybe you want the fat percentage to come down, but the numbers to stay stable, which means eat a little more, eat a lot more protein, and keep up the exercise. Basically, you should be using that strategy to adjust and rejigger your day-to-day operations. And if you're not using it properly. It also, and I think the reason I use this example is it also doesn't have to be super labor intensive. I think people think of strategies as being giant, complex things. They're not. They're sort of overarching principles, directions that then can weigh in on individual decisions. So we have a very simple chart that we use when we help people develop strategies that starts with business drivers, moves to technology principles, and then has the value realization, which is consultant speak for the good stuff you get out of having that strategy. And they are things like getting the right products, organizing appropriately. So an example, and it's a good simple example. In fact, in line with the follow-up, let's say your strategy is to outsource as much as possible, insource only those technologies that you view as highly differentiating. Then the question is, how have you organized your teams? Do you have people that are focused on cloud? Do you have people that are focused on managing the outsourcers? Do you have enough people focused on managing the cloud and the outsourcers? Because if you don't, you are not staffing in line with your strategy. So again, it's not this big, complicated, heavy, complex thing. It's like, hey, if we say our goal is to not do this, but to have other people do it, we should have fewer people that do it and more people that manage it, manage the outsourcers who are doing it. Or vice versa. If you're insourcing, I'm not saying you should outsource or you should use cloud. It's the real issue here is, are you staffing in line with your strategy? And it's the kind of thing that can be kind of an aha moment.
Yep. And it can keep you from getting locked into just sort of the technology for technology's sake dynamic that is really easy for folks in IT to fall into. God knows I did myself on more than one occasion just say, hey, the next phase in the evolution of server technology is X, and we've got to get to that without having that tied to anything that the business needed or even wanted at the time. So strategies are a great way of reining in that tendency. You don't have to take your eye off the technology evolution dynamic, but you do have to anchor your pursuit of the new to the company's pursuit of whatever it is the company is pursuing. Now, I'm going to throw in a big caveat there, and that is, and this is something that our clients tell us, we can't always get a business strategy out of business leadership. We can't always get the CEO and the COO and whoever to tell us what the heck the business is expecting to have happen over the course of the coming year or intending to make happen. We just hear about it when a specific directive comes our way. And
I'll jump in here, John, because some of you have said you like it when we discuss and debate. I agree, actually. So I'm not gonna argue with you, but I will say there's a couple things you can do as a technologist if you don't have a business strategy. And basically, the two principles to follow are, Bayesian. Take a Bayesian approach. Put your first guess into place and use the overarching, rule number one of internet logic, which is if you want the answer to a question, do not post the question, post the wrong answer and see how many people come in to correct you. And then you get the right answer. So because everybody loves to correct other people, particularly on the internet. So but you can see where I'm going with this. You can drop a single slide that says our business strategy is A, B, C, D, E, F, and then take it to the nearest business person and go, hey, I'm just the dumb technology guy. Is this right? And of course, they'll take advantage of correcting you. The other thing is if you're a public company or not-for-profit that publishes its financial data, you can look online and see what is stated as your financial strategy. You can also point out if there are gaps. For example, if the strategy is to grow by acquisition and you haven't acquired a company in donkey's years, you might point that out to the leadership and say, look, should we be using the strategy that's on the website or the thing I've been seeing for the past few years? Help me decide, because your mode of growth really, really affects what decisions you make as an IT person.
And you can always fall back on business basics. The company's going to want to increase revenues, decrease costs.
Right,
you can
but it does matter how.
Right, exactly. But, look at what aspects of IT support directly how revenues come in or how costs are reduced across the company. And you can start from there and loft we think the business plan is this pot shot and then wait for the corrections.
I do remember one of the most successful strategies we ever developed, and I could still see the look on the face of the guy. That was Dave,
Mm-hmm.
John.
Yep. Yep.
We walk into a room with a bunch of engineers, and I said, okay, before we do anything, what is Company X's strategy? And Dave looked at me like I'd grown four heads. Like, this is the stupidest question in the world. Why did we hire a consultant? And then wrote five things down on a whiteboard and said, that's what it is. I said, works for me. And we were off to the races. And it was pretty darn close to what the business strategy really was. So, don't overthink the fact that you don't have a business strategy. Take a step back, see what you think the business strategy seems to be, make your best guess, sanity check it with the executives, and then just go. I mean, don't use it as a reason you can't have a technology strategy unless you are doing that for some other political reason, like you don't want to develop one for some reason. It's not a valid reason not to have a technology strategy. You can always take your best guess and work from there. And then we get to our next topic, which is revising the strategy.
Well, yeah, and it's really important to remember that a strategy is not a straitjacket. It's a statement of intent and a statement of how you plan to implement your intent. And it can't be treated as something to follow, do or die, because stuff happens. Circumstances change. Things happen outside your company that affect your company, outside your organization that affect your organization. One of the things that happens, no matter what else is happening in the larger world, is that you lose staff. And that can throw a real wrench into execution on a strategy. And you have to reformulate what you're planning on doing and when, if you lose, say the three core people in your network architecture and engineering groups. They might jump to an outsourcer in the area who's hiring, thinking back to that follow-up, and get off the treadmill in your company and onto the omni company treadmill. So now you've got to execute on your strategy, and you've lost three of the people who are central to executing on your strategy. So your strategy has to be amended. At the very least, the timeline's adjusted, and possibly in the face of that kind of change, actually transformed in some way. Your strategy might shift to being outsourcing the network engineering function.
I'm going to push back on that, John. Sure. I don't think that's correct. Don't confuse execution with strategy. If your strategy is to outsource, continue outsourcing, slow it down, change your process, but you don't get to say, oh, wow, we just lost the project manager that was going to oversee outsourcing, so our strategy just changed. It doesn't work like that, because your strategy is linked to the business drivers. So it's not something you can just sort of a flapping in the wind that you can just sort of change its direction when circumstances change your environment. Circumstances may change the business environment, and that should flow through to the technology strategy, but it normally doesn't work the other way around, with the one exception that there may be a new technology that moots whatever the business was trying to do. So just as an example, the business strategy may be to reduce costs and improve functionality on retail, and the web comes along and Amazon comes along and retail is actually dead. So you probably want to be putting a lot of energy into building a website or integrating with Amazon. And in the event that a new technology arises on the horizon, you have to bring it back to the business and have them change their strategy. That's a whole different thing. But you don't get to reactively push back up and say, oh, we're not outsourcing because I just lost my person.
I was looking at that in the opposite direction. We are going to start outsourcing because I lost all these core people to outsourcers, and now I can't hire replacements for them and continue to pursue my insourced strategy. I need to shift to an outsourcing strategy in order to actually pursue my strategy's goals. So yes, your technology principles can shift mid-year in that kind of a circumstance.
They can, but only if the business principles change.
No. Remember, it's business strategy, IT principles that support the business strategy,
and that's the point. They always
so you can change in the middle as well as at the top.
You can, with very limited exceptions, John.
Well, yeah, and I was just pointing out one of those exceptions.
But that's not an exception. You can't go back to the business and say, "Oh, I've changed my mind. We're insourcing."
No,
If
no.
insourcing
Okay,
is a
first of all,
direct
I've been
result or
arguing
what
from the start about
doesn't
shifting to
matter.
outsourcing. And
Doesn't
if you can no longer get insourced resources to do something, but you still need to do that thing in order to support the business strategy, you can shift. You can shift your principle for IT from insourcing to outsourcing in response to reality.
yes, but no. Like at
Or
some
yes.
point, no, at some point you've got to just say, look, these technology principles exist in the service of business drivers. It's unidirectional. So if you looked at the business drivers and said the best way to get there is to insource or outsource, it doesn't matter which one. The best way to get there is this sourcing strategy. That fact doesn't change based on the reality. You can go back and say, it is not possible to achieve this goal with this strategy. Do we wish to change it? But you can't just sort of flip it and say, oh, by the way, guys, I changed my mind. We're not doing this. Oh, by the way, guys, I changed my mind and we're not going to save money. Oh, by the way, guys, I changed my mind and we're not going to support growth by acquisition. No, it
But
doesn't work that way.
those are business strategies, growth by acquisition.
Correct.
IT principles, we're going to insource to support growth by acquisition. That can change independently of the business strategy changing, because it might become 100 times easier, faster, more effective, and more secure to do the network part of growth by acquisition using a newly available kind of platform, right?
Well, that's what I just said. The one exception is new technology.
And it might also, but that also entails, outsourcing basically the jobs of the people who used to do that insourced for you.
Right. But
so you're
again,
also shifting to an outsourcing strategy because it's cloud. And remember, cloud is a form of outsourcing, like we said at the top of the episode.
In that scenario, it is not shifting strategy. I mean, I would say you can change.
It's shifting technology principle.
No, it's going back to the business and saying, guys, we are rejiggering our technology principles to better align with the business strategy. That's something you have to do first. You can't suddenly say, "Oh, I've changed my mind." And I'm pushing on this hard.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm not saying do it in a vacuum. I'm not saying doing it without communicating. I'm just saying you're going to wind up doing it sometimes because stuff happens.
Yes, but there's what I'm trying to articulate is if you see this as a process, there are business drivers, there are technology principles, there's a technology strategy. The feedback loop goes all the way back to the business. It doesn't stop at the technology principles.
I would only suggest that there's multiple paths in that feedback loop, and you could go straight to the technology principles, which the business sometimes cares about and sometimes doesn't, as long as you're supporting them in their strategic goals and getting stuff done when it needs to get done. The principles that you follow in developing your technology strategy are often of less concern to them than the results that you produce.
That's true, but it's also the case that at a high level, the whole point of a technology principles is that it's in some sense independent of the details. Overall,
bingo.
Overall, X is better. So therefore, if outsourcing is better, the detail or insourcing is better. I don't care. The detail of the particular humans you have at your fingertips at a particular point in time is a detail. It shouldn't be a driver unless unless there's some overarching, hey, the world is no longer producing people with this skill set. Okay. But if it happens to be that in Denver, Colorado, you simply weren't able to hire these people, then maybe you sit down and think about hiring them in Chicago, or maybe you sit down and think about something else, but you don't shift the strategy because, oh, gee, at this exact moment in time, I'm not able to get the resources. That's what I'm getting at. Now, if it's actually the case that your strategy is to, I don't know, maintain a giant legacy of COBOL programmers and they're all dying off, at some point you kind of go back and say, our strategy should be to retire all of this. And I am changing that strategy because 5 years ago when they were still alive, it was a viable strategy, but now it's not. But that's kind of my point, is that the strategy is independent of both the immediate situation, the day-to-day fluctuations. If you can't find 5 guys to do a job, you don't get to go back and say, or 5 gals, you don't get to go back and say, oh, well, we've changed our mind. That's my point.
But you also don't get to just not have the job done.
Yes, right.
Because you can't hire people to do it, and you can't just sit on your hands and say, well, I'll wait until I can hire somebody. You got to do stuff. So,
yes.
There's also things that happen in the environment that are at a higher level and affect not just you, but all your competitors and suppliers and so forth, or the whole country or the whole world. Um, Somebody puts a bunch of tariffs on the world trade and disrupts
Or
the flow of stuff that your company relies on to make the stuff it makes to sell to other people. Or and this has happened a bunch of times during my career or during my lifetime. A country that is crucial to what your business does embargoes the U.S., and I'm thinking of the oil embargoes in the 70s when I was a kid, or gets invaded and stops shipping or producing or doing the contract work that it used to do. And I'm thinking if here a lot of companies lost Ukrainian programmers when Ukraine got invaded, or there's been a natural disaster and the companies that normally produce stuff for your usage can't. Earthquake, flood, fire. Lots of these things have happened. Hurricanes, typhoons. Or a fire. And this is one I'm trying to remember the exact details of. Like a fire knocked out one of only two factories that wound up producing 90% of, I can't remember what, RAM assemblies or something. And this was back in the early 2000s, right after we got done worrying about Y2K.
So, John, point taken, but I would argue this isn't an also. This is actually one of the key triggers that says it's time to rethink your strategy. And the gotcha is business may not have thought about this fast enough. Like we're still talking to clients who are dependent to a certain extent on government, US government funding, and they haven't rejiggered their lives if that funding drastically drops. And from an IT perspective, you need to be already looking at this and saying, oh, hey, 70% of our infrastructure is going to support these government projects, which are going to go away. So therefore, I need to rejigger my staff so they're fleshing, presumably the business strategy will be to get more business that's not government. So I'm probably going to need more people working on the non-business infrastructure or whatever. But that's one of the key times when you need to rethink your technology strategy. And you need to do so in conjunction with the business and possibly draw their attention to the fact that these macroeconomic changes, world changes, geopolitical changes are going to affect your technology strategy. So
And things
that is
happen.
kind of a key point. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And things happen to the business that will
Right.
affect your IT strategy. Things happen like your company gets acquired, and suddenly your IT strategy is, I've got to fit into their IT strategy. Or you acquire somebody, and this is not the every year kind of activity for your company that it is for some. It's once a decade kind of thing. And suddenly, your IT strategy has to incorporate including them and their stuff into your stuff. Your company can go bankrupt. That happens distressingly often. Your company can shift its product focus or the geographies that it's doing business in. Again, think of tariffs, or the target demographic it's chasing. And that can all happen mid-cycle. And let's not forget, business leadership changes, and business leadership changes far more frequently and randomly than major company strategies change on their own. So your new CEO may be taking the company in a different direction. The new COO may have very different thoughts about how to execute on strategy.
Or a product may come out, and I'm thinking right now, I can use names because it's been so long ago, but years ago when we were advising clients, I'll never forget walking into Pfizer and talking to the IT department and having them sketch out their need for a website that was managing an enormous volume of traffic that they did not currently have. And I remember my boss looking over at them and going, what the heck did you guys do? Did you cure impotence? And of course, they were just about to come out with Viagra, and the IT people were like, we suspect that a lot of people are going to hit our website. So they just looked at him, they went white and said, who told you? And then we looked at each other and went, oh my gosh. A major new product launch can affect strategy as well, is the main point. So be alert to these things, use them as flags. Like something happens, the next team meeting you have the next week should be something like, hey guys, let's do a little brainstorming exercise. How do we think this might affect our strategy? Capture and document those findings, and then you'll be ready to deal with it when senior executives come and decide to come and tell you. You're like, yeah, we thought about that and we're on it, which is always a great place to be.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes keeping in mind the debate we just had about IT principles and the technology principles and whether they should change mid-cycle, sometimes they become compelling mid-cycle. You mentioned Amazon and having a web front. And I feel like that's less compelling as an example of mid-cycle necessity because that was slow rolling for the first few years.
That's fair. Yeah.
And then suddenly it was very sharp. But like a couple years ago, 18 months ago, one might have thought, oh, wait, I don't have any technology principle that says deploy AI in support of low-level wordsmiths in my company, the marketing folks and stuff. Maybe I should. Or March 2020, I probably didn't have an IT principle that said support remote work, but by May, I really ought to have incorporated that into my planning for the year.
I disagree, actually, that either of those disproves my point, because technology is punctuated equilibrium, right? We were doing remote work before COVID. We were doing AI before ChatGPT. The point is, you should be keeping an eye on the vast portfolio of things that could change. There should have been a conversation back in your organization that says, okay, we're doing, 10% of our people are doing remote work today. What if, for some reason, like a pandemic, we had to suddenly transition to 100% remote work? Or it could just be a strategy change, which happened to me in the 90s when we had the dot-com crash. Mm-hmm. My CEO boss said, I'm done with owning facilities. We are divesting ourselves of all the facilities. Let's pivot right now to 100% remote work. And we did. So the point is, all of these things are bubbling along into the background until suddenly something will happen when they're not. You should actually, your strategy should encompass what are the technologies we're watching? What are the environmental, business, geopolitical trends we're watching? And what might we need to be prepared to do in a real hurry if they kick in? So yes, you're still changing the principle mid-cycle because AI was not a thing until it was suddenly a thing, or remote work was not a thing until it was suddenly a thing. But it shouldn't be such a deep surprise. You should basically say, oh, in light of this predicted concern, we are now switching from technology principle A to technology principle B because it's important. And again, that's the one exception where I would say you get to go make that change sort of almost not unilaterally because you have to go back, you have to loop in the business, but that's the kind of thing that would drive a shift in technology principle once you've set them.
Sure. And if the business wasn't beating down your door saying, hey, we need to support remote work, your business leadership was having some problems at that point too.
Actually, John, to be perfectly honest, our clients, I remember getting calls in early January from our clients. Janet called me and said, hey, I've been watching this stuff in China. We're going to have to pull all our workers into remote, and that's going to be a problem because we don't know how to get into the servers. So I've got a strategy for that. I remember the dates exactly because we as a company were planning to go to a bunch of global trade shows. And partly on that call, I was like, wow, this thing we've been hearing rumors about is a thing. So I actually nailed down a strategy that said, we will pull out of our trade shows if this happens, and this happens, which they did. And then we did. But the point was, IT was ahead of the curve because one of the disciplines you want as a strategist is to be constantly scanning the horizon and going, hang on, that's a little teeny blip right now, but in about 15 minutes, it's going to be a cargo vessel that's headed for a crash with our vessel. So maybe we want to turn.
Oh, absolutely. I remember sitting with one of the big financial services institutions based in Boston, working through their bird flu plans back when bird flu was the pandemic we were worried about. So this was, again, mid-2000s. And, hopefully they never took that completely off their radar and kept updating that plan over time. But not everyone did. And not everyone ever had a plan like that. They never thought, what if a pandemic takes my business, which is 99.9% all conducted on premises right now, and made it so we couldn't do that. And so, for them, suddenly they've got a support remote work requirement and it's immediate. And so they have a new principle and they need to fold that into their revised strategy.
Yep, but I wouldn't say that this is significantly different from the example I gave because in
Yeah,
general, technology perks along until suddenly it pops, and that's another discipline. So
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of wrapping up, I think why should you have a strategy? Hopefully we've made that clear. Why follow it? Well, because this is the best possible way you can ensure that IT aligns with the business. And then I think the questions to ask yourself on a regular basis, are there reasons we can't follow the strategy? How significant are these reasons? Are they significant enough to go back to the business? Are there changes at the business level that are going to change our strategy? These are all questions you want to be asking yourself on a regular basis. And of course, are there changes in the technology environment that should drive our strategy? I'm thinking right now, currently, a thing to keep an eye on is all things quantum, not just quantum computing, not just quantum resistant cryptography, but also quantum sensing, quantum networking. These are all things you want to keep an eye on. So, you know, so I think the main importance of a strategy is that it causes you to think about things that you probably wouldn't have and to make modest tweaks and course corrections during standard times and be prepared to make major shifts early and effectively when they're needed. That's kind of the long-winded answer.
If you know why you're not doing something right now, then you know when to change your decision about what to do.
And that is so perfect, John. I'm just going to let you have the last word on that one. And thank everyone for joining us today. Again, if you got feedback or a follow-up, packetpushers.net/FU or packetpushers.net/follow-up. We love to hear from you. We take the ideas. Also, let us know if you want to come on the show. We love having guests, and we're looking for more guests this summer. So please give us a call, drop us a note at packetpushers.net/follow-up, and we will follow up with you. Also, you'll find at packetpushers.net the Network Break podcast, which helps you stay current on the latest tech news and what it means, and a whole lot more, including my personal favorite, the merch, the store. And there's lots of cool things you can get, t-shirts and coffee cups and ball caps and everything else. Finally, if you want to reach us, you can reach us at nemerdes.com. That's N like Nancy, E-M like Mary, E-R-T like Thomas, E-S like Sam.com. I know that is not the correct lingo for those. John always wants me to use the correct one, but I like it that way. And of course, you can hit both of us up on LinkedIn. John Burke, Jonatil Johnson. We look forward to hearing from you.